Travis, welcome to the show, man.
Justin, what's up, dude? Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, it's so funny. I mentioned before I hit record, I was like, I can't believe we haven't done this. Like, I feel like I met you what seems like for both of us 7 lifetimes ago.
Yeah,
Like,
definitely, dude.
beginning stages of podcasting, trying to figure it out. What is this medium? We see some things happening, but what is it to me? And I want to get into that with you because you took this medium and really utilized it to, for lack of a better term, skyrocket your brand, your network, people you talk to. Was that the original idea when you started? Let's go back. Like, how long
Yeah.
have you been podcasting? Like, what was your initial thought? What's all the good stuff?
Yeah, dude. So it was 2017 when I launched my show, August of 2017. So coming up on 7 years now. So six and a half at this point. 900 and I think 912 episode. I think we just released 912, 913 or something like that. And when I started, I had zero intention of using it for all the things that I've used it for now. It was really just a matter of I was doing door-to-door sales at the time, and that was all I had ever really done in my career up to that point. I was like 24, and I was just like, I don't want to keep knocking on doors forever, and I had no idea what I really wanted to do, but I knew that whatever I wanted to do needed to check a few boxes. It needed, like, freedom was the ultimate like thing that I was always solving for. And I like to travel. I don't like people telling me what to do. There's a few things like that were just paramount on my list of priorities in terms of what I wanted to do with my life. And frankly, door-to-door sales offered a good amount of that already. Especially for somebody like me who didn't have like a good college degree or anything like that to fall back on in my early 20s. And I got married really young. I got married when I was 21. So when I figured out I didn't want to use my unaccredited Bible college degree to go be a pastor or whatever, it's like there's not many other things that you can use that degree for. So the options were door to door or like go get a job and make like 30 grand a year. And so door to door was like, it's 100% commission, door to door sales, which like theoretically sucks. Like that's not a sexy job. If you go talk to a bunch of people, like that's not,
Stressful.
yeah, it's not the one that's at the top of the list if people are writing out their dream careers. But at 21, it enabled me to make 6 figures in like 25-hour work weeks. So I had some freedom. I had a little bit of flexibility. If I wanted to work, I worked. If I didn't want to work, I didn't have to work. But if I didn't work, I didn't eat. Right? You don't get money if you don't work and you're 100% commission sales guy. So
Yeah.
it taught me self discipline, taught me self reliance. It was like it's kind of like a way to dip your toe into entrepreneurship in a sense, because it's kind of like running your own business, except for that you don't have to worry about half of the things you have to worry about when you're running a business. You have to worry about ops, systems and processes and customer service and hiring and firing and all that kind of stuff. You just go do your thing. But it was enough to where I figured out pretty quickly, even though I was doing pretty well with it, that I didn't want to do it long term. So I was listening to podcasts, listening to audiobooks, reading for the first time, really ever, just trying to really figure out what am I going to do next. And I didn't really know. All I knew is that I wanted to check a few boxes, and it was basically like, I want something that will give me time freedom, like real freedom. And to me, real freedom is defined by like multiple types of freedom, like time freedom, location freedom, financial freedom, things like that. Right. It's like door to door gave me some financial freedom because 6 figures at 21 is pretty solid.
Better than most.
Um,
Yeah.
it gave me some time freedom because I could choose when I worked and when I didn't work. I worked 20 to 25 hours a week. It wasn't like I was killing myself making 6 figures. But it gave me zero location freedom. It's like if I leave, I don't make money. If I go somewhere and I go on a 7-day trip, it means I either have to stack commissions before I leave or I have to work as harder when I come back to make up for the pipeline that was gone during the week that I was gone. And so this next thing, I was like, I wanted to check all the boxes, and that's why making money online seemed to be the best path forward. It was just like, well, if I make money online, I can do that from anywhere, and I can be making money while I'm traveling and things. So I was like, well, plus I'm a millennial, you know what I mean? I should probably learn how to make some money online if because that's probably going to be something about the future is going to be that. So I had no idea how to do it. And podcasting, I had seen a couple of people that were making crazy money podcasting, and it just seemed interesting and fun to me. So my initial intention was like, oh, start a show, get on the top charts, get a bunch of listeners, get sponsorship income, and then become a millionaire. You know what I mean? And obviously didn't work out that way. So started the show. It was crickets. I did all the right things. I hired a coach. I was like almost 20 grand in before I launched my show on like coaches, masterminds, website, you know, everything that you could possibly think of, because I was just like, I'm going to treat this like a business if I wanted to
Yeah.
make money. And then I hit the top charts. I did all the things I was supposed to do that was supposed to bring a windfall of free traffic my way, and just none of it actually ended up happening, even though I did hit those specific requirements. And really what happened, it was just like my coach's information was outdated. It was just like they were working on 2013, 2014 podcasting industry, and I was coming in 2017 podcast industry, and it was just wildly different by that time period. And so when I realized I wasn't making money that way, I basically just had to pivot and start like figuring out, okay, how do I make money online besides just sponsorship income? And that kind of took me into masterminds and coaching, and I did podcast coaching and consulting for a while. And then I did a podcast course for a little while, taught me a little bit about online marketing. We started scaling that with the webinar, selling the course and the webinar. And then all of that led to a live event that I did for the first time. Sold a mastermind there, which was like a $200,000 weekend. And I was like, this is sweet. Let's keep running live events. And that was at the end of 2019, which is my first live event, which the punchline would be that 2-3 months later, COVID shut down all live events. And I had zero interest in doing anything virtually. In fact, like the core differentiator in what I was doing at the time was that it was like experiential type mastermind retreats, like in Costa Rica, in Bali, in Thailand. Like it was based on our ability to like go somewhere and travel. So moving it to virtual to me just wasn't an option. So at that time I was like, well, what am I going to do? This shut down. Like more than half of my revenue was coming from that.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, and I couldn't even fulfill on the one that I sold. So I had like disgruntled customers. I had no path forward in terms of like live events and stuff. And that's when I decided to get into software and I started Guestio. So we started Guestio. I put the entire first build on 0% interest credit cards. It was like $80,000-$90,000 in credit cards that I racked up just getting the MVP out. Got the MVP out, and then ended up raising a $1.3 million seed round for that in 2021. And then just kind of left everything else I was doing in the dust, hustled Guestio. And now Guestio, the software still exists. The software didn't do as well as I was hoping. We're still trying to figure it out on the software side. It's been a couple of years. But luckily, since I have a little bit of, that kind of hustle entrepreneurship mentality, we pivoted to allowing some like back-end managed services in the software. So it allowed us to like not be bleeding cash. And now we're actually a profitable business, and we have a little bit of time to like try to figure out the software side. But yeah, that's kind of the catch up. To answer your question, I didn't know that it was going to do half the shit that it did for me. I was just starting it because it seemed like a good idea. It checked all the boxes of how I wanted to make money, and seemed really interesting to me.
Dude, there's so many similarities in your story and mine. So a couple things. I did direct sales, not door to door necessarily, but direct sales in home. Did that,
Yeah.
was making really good money at a young age. I was like 19 and real close to six figures and barely working. And then fast forward a bunch of stuff, but I actually did do real door to door sales for 2 weeks. I was selling lawn care services, and it
Nice.
was the worst job I ever had in my life. Absolute worst job ever. And so kudos to you for having success in it. Not only like it was fine, like I did fine in the 2 weeks that I was there, like I was closing deals and doing all the things, but I was like, this is miserable. So I
Yeah.
quit immediately. But then, launched the podcast not knowing, fast forward, got into live events and started getting paid well to speak. And then COVID, lost 70% of my income, and then had to pivot, right? But I think the lesson, and something you're continuing to do today, the lesson is following something that you feel you're passionate about and then having to pivot at the moments. Most people don't pivot. They just keep
Yeah.
continuing to pour in. Like, when do you know when you're like, okay, this isn't working, I need to do something different? Because a lot of people will just continue to hammer in on that one thing that's not working.
This is something I've thought about a lot. I've asked a lot of people this question when they come on my show, because frankly, if I'm being totally honest, I think that I potentially give up on things too quickly sometimes. Um, I, it's one of those things, again, it's one of those things that I have to question about myself, because it's led me to a lot of really great things. The ability to pivot and change, I think is really underrated. And I think a lot of people are just too afraid of the change to accept that as an option. And it never really bothered me. It was always just like, if it, door to door was 100% commission. when I'm running my businesses, like it's all dependent on me and how much I'm selling. Like those like solopreneur type businesses, it was like it's all based on me. And so once I get to the point where I no longer believe in what I'm doing that much, it's really hard for me to continue doing it just for the sake of making money.
Yeah.
So even if they make like, I think I like baffled my wife when I stopped doing door to door and moved into podcasting full time, because it's the first time I've ever done something for way less money. It was like I was consistently, when I was selling water purification machines, the commissions were anywhere between $2,500 and $4,000 a deal, and I could sell 3 or 4 of those a week on doors. And if you like do the math on that, it's like, man, if you just worked hard selling those water machines door to door, like, let's say average $3,000 commission just for fun. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like, well, even 3 a week instead of 4 a week, that's 12 a month at 3,000, $35,000 months, in 25, 30 hours a week. And I just didn't care. I didn't want to do it anymore. I was so done. And it, like I said, it kind of blew her mind, because she was like, if I knew that I had the ability to go make that much money, I just feel like I would do it. But like, she was like, I can't do sales like you can. So how are you, and I stopped doing that to go do podcasting, which was making me like $4,000 a month.
Yeah.
Like we broke a lease on a beautiful home we were living in, moved in with my brother-in-law in a 2-bedroom apartment, you know what I mean? So that we could chop our monthly expenses down to a couple $1,000 a month. That to me was all worth it. It was like, it's worth it to me to cut and cut and cut and take away lifestyle bloat, essentially, to adjust my trajectory to put me on a path to be somewhere I actually want to be.
Yeah.
And I think there's too many people who, they get locked into those golden handcuffs way too early and never want to take them off. And that was just never me, man. Like I said, I think it's been a strength for me in a lot of ways, but there have been 1 or 2 times in my life that I've looked back on and been like, I should have stuck in that a little bit longer. Like I should have given that a really like given that the old college try a little bit more before I pivoted to something else at the time. But it's easy to look back and say those things, because maybe I wouldn't have ended up where I am now doing what I'm doing now had I hung on to those things. So it's difficult for me to answer that question. It's more of just like an intuitive feeling for me than it is
Sure.
like, here's the check boxes that I check before I pivot and move to something else. It is more just like, it doesn't feel right to me. It doesn't feel good to me. It doesn't fire me up anymore. And, the way I'm wired, bro, I don't know exactly what that is, but the way I'm wired, it's really difficult for me to keep doing something that I don't really enjoy or see full purpose in or don't completely believe in.
Did you have kids at that time?
When I was
Moving in
switching,
with your brother-in-law?
No,
Okay. Makes it a
no
little bit
kids at the
easier. I
time.
was like, whoa, your wife is crazy supportive. I mean, she is either way. So
Yes, yeah, yeah.
what was that conversation like? I'd love to know the back end of that. So I'm coming up, I'm a couple weeks away from my 1-year anniversary of my marriage.
Oh, cool, man. Congrats.
But yeah, thank you so much. But like, what was that conversation like, being like, hey, I'm gonna remove our income and I'm just gonna chase this crazy dream? Because look, 2017 was still a time when people would go, what's a podcast?
Yeah, yeah. Well, she said that. You know what I mean? Like she had no idea. She was like, "What are you doing? What's that?" And to her credit, she supported me the whole time, because like she knew that was my goal, that was my desire. So I didn't go full time until the end of 2018. I started my show like summer 2017. So when I started the show, like I told you, I was already like 15, 20 grand in.
Yeah.
So she already had to get on board for all of that, which was already mind blowing for her and for me at the time, because I had never invested any of that stuff before. So when I'm spending $6,500 for a weekend mastermind, it was like, well, what are you doing? How much? Why? Who's that? Who's going to be there? What's this going to do? You know what I mean? So it was almost just like, it was almost expected by the time that it actually happened, where the transition went from doing this to doing this full time. She was totally supportive and was just like, yeah, well, if that's going to make you happier, or that's going to make you feel better about what you're doing every day, then that's what you got to do. So yeah, let's do it. So it never she was always willing to just do what it took. You know what I mean? And to your point, to your point, we didn't have kids at the time. We had two big dogs, which was annoying to be in a tiny apartment with a 150-pound Great Pyrenees and a 90-pound German Shepherd. But and then it was me and my wife staying in one room and my brother-in-law in the other room. But like our portion of the rent and utilities was like $550 a month. You know what I mean? So it enabled me to like take a deep breath, not have to worry about my bills, and focus on how I'm going to turn this $3,500 a month trickle income into real income, that will not only enable us to like, get back into living the lifestyle that we like, but also in a way that fills me up and makes me happy.
Yeah.
So yeah, to her credit, she was always supportive. There was never a time where she was like, but I want this. And frankly, like, I also think that she just would have known that I would have never like buckled or caved to that, if that makes sense. Like
Sure.
she knows me, and she knows that if she would have been like combative about it, that I still would have done what I would have wanted to do anyway, and then we would just be at odds. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
she's
she
like,
kind of
I'm going to take the easy road here and support
right,
him, and we'll see. And I'm sure here on the other side, right? Like she also knows you wouldn't allow it to get to a point
exactly.
where you were truly in trouble.
Yeah, I'm degrading myself by saying all of that to just to kind of be funny, but at the end of the day, she knew that about me too. She trusted me to be like, look, you're spending all this money on these coaches and the masterminds and all this stuff that I don't even understand what it all is or what it even means or any of that stuff. But at the end of the day, you've always figured it out. And I believe that you're going to figure this out regardless. Like she was never worried about us, sleeping on the streets. She always knew that, if I had to, I'd get back into door to door, or I'd go. Like, that's the beautiful thing. That's why I encourage so many people to learn the skill of sale of selling and sales, because like, your risk tolerance is usually directly correlated to your confidence and your ability to go generate money for yourself. And if you can sell, you have this base level of confidence that exists, where it's like, yeah, I'm going to go drop 50K on this thing that hopefully it works out, and if it doesn't, that'd be a major bummer. But also, if it doesn't, I can go make 50K in like the next 60 to 90 days doing a sales gig if I really needed to do that. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I had that like kind of base level of confidence. She had that confidence in me, in my ability to do that, and knew that I wasn't going to just drop the ball if it wasn't going to work out that way. So she was very supportive in that, and I think she, had some evidence to support her belief in me as well.
No, for sure. And it's so true, man. And I like your thoughts on, taking risk, right? And understanding that you have the power to do it. And I think once you become like look, we talked about COVID, right? You had the success before COVID in your business and it fell apart. Same with me. But I was like, I'm not going to go get a job now. I'm just going to do
Right.
it again in a different way. I think once you find out in your life you can create money, it's a lot easier to go, I'm going to take a risk, or hey, let me tighten my belt for a couple of months and figure this whole piece out, right? I know you're a
Absolutely.
big believer in continuing to invest in yourself. And I talk a lot about the 5 people you need in your life, and one is always a coach. Somebody, I believe you should always be financially invested in your future 24/7, whether that's in, relationships, spirituality, health, whatever. And I know you're a big proponent of that. Talk a little bit more about the importance in your life of you investing in your growth, whether it be personally or professionally.
Yeah, it was always a level up. It was like, it's like Mario eating the magic mushroom. You can't help but level up if you get in some of these, like if you get around people who are just doing really really well. And I knew at the time, especially when I was getting started, that it was just going to be part of my story. Like, it had to be something that I did, because I didn't know anybody when I started, because I came from this like culty religious background. When I left that, I was starting from scratch in terms of like friendships, relationships, people that I knew. I didn't know anybody. I had never met a millionaire, let alone like had a personal relationship or friendship with one. And so the podcast was a really great way to do that. But also, like, I knew that if I invested in some of these groups and masterminds and events and conferences, it's like, you are you are taking the odds of meeting high quality people in the airport or the bar or a random setting, and you're condensing them into a single room where the odds are significantly increased. And all you have to do is go there and meet a bunch of people and continue relationships with people who you vibe with, people whose energy you like to be around, and people who are doing well in life and they're positive. Like, you go find those people, and you get kind of accepted into your tribe, so to speak, when you just like show up consistently, be a high quality person yourself, not be a taker. Like, you're going to start meeting some of these people. And so for me, it was always an immediate level up, even if the investment itself didn't work out, meaning like I paid whatever 20K for this thing and they promised this result, but I didn't get that result. I figured out that if I always showed up intentionally and with a good positive attitude, I would get something out of it, and it would almost always be equal to or greater than the investment that I put into it. And so it was just a part of my, who I was for a really long time.
Yeah.
I've probably invested over $400,000 now in the last 5-6 years into myself, in like masterminds, coaching, events, conferences, hotels, all of the above, self-education, self-improvement. There's a ignorance tax that we all have to pay, and the sooner you can pay it, the sooner you unlock your ability to increase your income, your earnings, your revenue, your happiness, your fulfillment, your friendships, everything. And
Yeah.
so that to me was always a way to shortcut my own ignorance tax.
Yeah. And look, you can build high level relationships without paying into things. I really
Of
believe
course.
that. It was something that I did for years with the podcast before I started to understand the importance of investing in myself. But it fast tracks who you have to become, right? So you can build low level relationships very easily with many high powerful people. But if you're in their circles continuously,
Yeah,
that changes the game. That's why I
absolutely.
love masterminds.
Yeah, that the 100 million mastermind that I joined was like life changing for me in that regard, because I had a bunch of the people that were like instructors and higher ups in that group. I'd already had them on my show before I joined the mastermind, but getting in the room in that context, where the majority of people there are doing like high 7 figures, 8 figures, some 9 figures, and then some people there were members of the group, like the professor, somebody I'd watched playing basketball growing up, it was on the N1 mixtapes and tour and all that
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah,
He
yeah.
was just a paying member of the group. Prince EA, who's done like 3 or 4 billion organic views on Facebook and YouTube. He was just a member of the group. Like, we played basketball together during one of the events. Like, those they became real relationships, rather than like, oh yeah, I was on Travis's podcast once. Okay, sure. But when it's just me and 5 or 6 of these people hanging out at a club after one of the events in Miami, like hanging out, having a good time and getting to know each other, that forges a real relationship, a friendship, rather than, again, like, oh, I know that guy, I was on his podcast once. It's like, oh, this is Travis, is my friend. You know what I mean? So it's certainly one of those things where, if you can justify it at all, I recommend doing it. And
Yeah.
even if you
And
can't justify it, like, it doesn't have to be $100,000 a year group when you're first jumping in, but something, and I would argue something that is a little bit uncomfortable in terms of payment.
yeah.
Do not just skip. Just don't just go join the mastermind that's $50 a month because you want to go try one. Because you join a $50 a month mastermind, you get a $50 a month mastermind. You join a $20,000 mastermind, you get a $20,000 mastermind. And obviously, there's ways to waste a lot of money in this space. And unfortunately, there's a lot of scammers and charlatans that have popped up who see it as a money grab and then don't really deliver on the things that they do. But like I said, anytime I've quote unquote wasted money on something like that, it's never been an actual waste of money. I've
Yeah.
always met somebody, taken a lesson away, implemented something that I learned from a person that I was hanging out with at the bar that night. There was always something that I could take away intentionally, implement it, and like see a direct return on the money that I'd put into it, back into my business. So yeah, I highly recommend it. And to me, dude, it's like every time you make an investment into yourself, it's like another vote for your internal belief in your own ability to accomplish things.
I love that.
You
I
know what I'm
love that.
saying? Like,
Yeah.
it's you're putting another dollar down. You're like, I believe I can do this. And that's what it has to be. It cannot be, I'm investing with Justin. Therefore, Justin must now make me successful.
Mm.
That can't be what it is. It's, I'm putting another dollar into myself because I believe that I can make this work out regardless of what happens with Justin. I do, obviously you want to vet everybody and you want to make the best judgments that you can and not just like go waste money willy nilly. I'm not suggesting that, but do your homework, do your research, vet the person, talk to people in the group. And like, if it all looks good, take the plunge, but do it with the intention of you being the person to make sure that the return comes back. And then if Justin ends up referring me business to make my money back or tells me something that I change in my marketing or whatever that makes me money, like, great, that's awesome. That to me is like the cherry on top. But ultimately, I know it's a vote in me to go make something happen for myself, not to go like put the onus on somebody else just because I paid them some money.
Yeah. It's so funny you talk about the $100 million mastermind. I was invited to that. And at the time, so by Joel, and at the time, I was making the amount that the investment was in. I'm like, dude, I can't make this happen. I don't regret it because I found other avenues and all that stuff for myself and my growth, and it's been phenomenal. But I've seen nothing but great things from that group. I mean, super high level conversations, really, really good people that are involved. But I think again, what's the intention that you're setting? So I have a mastermind filled with 6 and 7 figure entrepreneurs who are incredible human beings, and they're some of my favorite people on this planet. Thank goodness. But the reason they're that way is because I set the intention with saying two things. One, you don't join my mastermind so you can be more like Justin or follow my path. That's the first thing. It's not a top-down mastermind. It's a community-driven mastermind. And number two, the first rule of being in the mastermind is you give more than you receive. And so when I set that intention, and by the way, I'm bringing this up because you said that earlier, right? Give as much of yourself as you possibly can. But when you set that intention, you attract the right people. It's not the people coming in being like, what am I getting out of this?
Totally.
What's in it for me? So when did you learn that in your life, the importance of giving without expectation of return?
The first time I understood the concept was I read this book by Adam Grant, who's one of my favorite authors, and it's called Give and Take. And if you don't know Adam Grant, he's a top-rated professor at the Wharton School of Business. And when he writes books, it's written as if he's writing like a research paper. You know what I mean? It's just layered in research and data and studies and real social science, essentially. Not just a guru pontificating on the pages to hopefully sell more of their shit. So Give and Take is basically it's more or less like a study of successful people and unsuccessful people and where they fit in their reciprocity styles. And so there's 3 main reciprocity styles: there's givers, there's takers, and there's matchers. So when I read the book, I would have identified more as a matcher. I was very much like kind of transactional, like you help me, I help you. I was a door-to-door sales guy. I was a transactional guy. And this is like right when I started my show. So my show was called Build Your Network at the time. So it was very relationship networking driven, but I started it not because I was the networking expert, but because I wanted to become one. And somebody had recommended this book to me very early on when I started my show. And so I read it. It was one of the first books that I read cover to cover when I was getting into personal development. And it completely changed the way that I looked at giving of your resources and what it really means to add value to somebody. And so essentially, like, the punchline is he goes into all this stuff about studying givers, takers, and matchers, and which of those 3 groups end up at the top of the success ladder, which of those 3 groups end up at the bottom of the success ladder. And what they found was that givers ended up both at the top and at the bottom of the success ladder, and in the way that you would think that would be at the bottom, where it's like some people just don't know when to say no and they become doormats and they never receive any value, and they're always just they're letting takers leech off of them. And then there's, but the givers at the top, the people at the top of the success ladder are also givers, people who give more than they receive. And then he goes into a few ways to make sure that you're the giver at the top instead of the giver that ends up at the bottom. But it really just reframed my thinking at the time to just be like, you know what, the answer is to give as much as you can without expecting anything in return, and trust that the universe has your back. Yeah. It's really the punchline. And I read Gary Vee's book at the time, Ask Gary Vee, and he said something in there about how it's his goal to always add at least 51% of the value in every relationship that he has. And those types of philosophies just made a lot of sense to me. So I adopted those very early on, just to say, what can I give? I didn't have much to give at the time. I was a 24-year-old kid. I didn't really have a bunch. I didn't have a ton of money. I didn't have a bunch of connections or relationships or time, or anything else. But what I did have was time. I did have some I did have some free time, where I was just like, I don't know what to do with this free time. And so I'd find ways to serve people with whom I wanted to connect more, so that I could get around them, but also so I could give something to them. And those people were strapped for time. So they needed hours, somebody's hours, and they needed quality work hours from competent communicators to do like sales or communication or work a booth for them or whatever. So I just volunteered time, and I would go figure out a way to get myself around these people, just so I could like soak in as much knowledge, information, even just like I learn a lot through observation. And I think that's one thing I think I'm pretty good at, is just like sitting back and observing. And I don't speak a lot. I don't talk a lot unless I'm asking a question to somebody else or somebody's asking me a question. Other than that, I just kind of sit down, shut up, and I observe, and I watch what successful people do, and I watched, how rich people spoke to each other, and I watched how great communicators would speak on stage, and I watched how the event runner would run the event, and I watched how they sold tickets, and what I'm saying? I would just get in and absorb as much information as I possibly could, through this back door of like being willing to contribute something to this person who basically has everything that they need. You know what I mean? But there's something that I can help with, and I'm going to figure out what that is. And I'm just going to give it freely. And I don't have any asks. It's just that I want to help somehow. And that attitude just served me very, very well. Especially at the beginning when I didn't really have much to offer. Now it's like way easier for me to add value to somebody. Like just a quick text intro could bring $1 million to your business. You know what I mean? Just with like the right person, put it in the right group chat. They do business together, and this 9-figure person and this 9-figure person doing business together is worth a lot of money to them. Whereas like before, it would have been really difficult for me to add value to somebody with a 9-figure business. Like now it's become a lot easier, because the more you work on yourself, the more you become a valuable person. The more valuable of a person you become, the easier it is to add value to other people. And your networking relationship will always increase in direct proportion to the amount of value and the quality of the value that you can add to the people around you. So yeah, it really stuck with me at the very beginning of this whole journey.
Yeah, it's funny. Both you and I have had the honor of sitting down and interviewing some of the smartest people in the world, some of the most famous, influential people in the world. And we get to sit down and we get to, quote unquote, even though I hate this term, pick their brain for an hour, have a deep conversation, build relationship, do all these things. And so I get a question all the time that I always refuse to answer, which is, who's your favorite guest? And I'm not going to ask you that, because nobody wants that on record. But I do want to ask you, out of all the people, I mean, and I can't list them all because there's a ton, but I mean, I've seen you've interviewed Shaq. You just had Brandon Novak on your show. Like the list goes on and on. For you, who was the most intimidating? Who was the one that when you sat down with them, you were like, I'm nervous, until you were probably like 10, 15 minutes into the conversation. You're like, okay, now we're on level playing field. What was for you? What was the big nerves?
Shaq, easy.
Yeah.
He's also my favorite. I'll tell you my favorite. It's Shaq. I don't have a second favorite, but that one I know is my favorite. For several reasons, not just because he's Shaq and everybody knows Shaq, but because he was like, quite literally, bro, he was my childhood hero. Like when I was a kid, played a ton of basketball, and I'm from LA County, so the Kobe Shaq Lakers were my team, and Shaq was my favorite player. So I had Shaq jerseys and bobbleheads. I had a painting of Shaq on my wall. I had like basketball cards and collectibles and all that stuff with Shaq all over it. And then as I grew and evolved as a person, he grew and evolved as a person and went beyond being a basketball player. And so like when I was getting into entrepreneurship, he was also crushing it in entrepreneurship, and he owns hundreds of franchises, and he finds ways to get salaries from all these different things that he does. And he has endorsement deals, even post career, that, more endorsement deals than people get while they're in their career. He figured out a way to stay extremely relevant, to make a ton of money, to invest that money wisely, to take care of his family. There's a lot of things that I admire and respect about him. So, and then what happened was that interview came by through, I knew a guy who's close with Shaq, and this guy has a charity, and I had donated to the charity in an auction style thing, and then the prize was a FaceTime call with Shaq. And so I was like, oh, that's dope. Like, that'd be cool to win. And I ended up winning it. And so I was trying to schedule it for a couple of weeks and we kept going back and forth. And frankly, I was like kind of getting worried. I was like, did I just get scammed out of money? Like, is this money even go to the charity? You know what I mean? And then eventually they finally got back to me and they're like, hey, he can do tomorrow, but this was like at night, right? This is like late at night. They're like, he could do tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. or whatever. And I didn't read the email until the next morning at like 9:45 or 10. So I didn't know it was happening until like 40 minutes before it was happening. And then we jump on the call and it ended up being on Zoom. And all I said, like, I was trying to figure out a way to leverage into a podcast interview rather than just doing a call. So at the very beginning, I was just like, hey man, I was like, look, when I started my podcast a few years ago, you were the first name I wrote down on my dream list of people I wanted to interview. So I was like, I know this isn't an interview, but second best to an interview is the call. So I appreciate you taking your time. And he was like, well, you have my permission to record this and ask some questions if you want. And I was like, oh, okay,
Done.
cool. So it was dope, but also like I had almost no preparation. I didn't even know the call was going to happen until like 30 minutes before it was happening.
Yeah.
And then wasn't expecting to be able to do the interview right then and there. I was like, if like best case scenario, I can turn this into an interview in like a couple weeks or something, so it was just like, it was a big mixture of things. And then he was just like, yeah, go ahead. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess I'm going to do a quick podcast interview. And so it was supposed to be like a 5-minute call. He gave me like 20 minutes, super gracious with his time, gave me some great answers and ended up doing the interview. So my wife was in the room for that one just because she thought it was cool. And she came over and Shaq said hi to her, and actually hit on her for a second. It was kind of funny. And then she was just standing there. She was like, afterwards, she was like, I have not seen you nervous to talk to somebody in a very long time, but I could definitely tell that you had your nerves up on that one. And I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. This is somebody I've like wanted to talk to since I was like 6.
Yeah, it's
And then it
almost
just
like you
happened
become
like
that
that.
6-year-old again. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
right.
Like you
Right.
get into that situation and like, when people ask me who's your favorite, I always say I don't necessarily have a favorite, but there's some moments, right? And a lot of the moments were kind of always childhood things, childhood
Yeah.
related. Diamond Dallas Page, Ricky Williams, like individuals like that, where I'm like, this is crazy. Like
Yeah.
11-year-old Justin would be freaking out right now.
Yeah, totally.
And like otherwise, I'm like, they've all been great except for one that I didn't release. And it's the only interview I've never released, but it's such a cool journey to embark on, when you have the right intention, when you have the right purpose in mind with the conversations you're having and the impact that you want to make. And I think that that's something you do really, really well. Like, hey, yes, it's cool that I get to have this conversation, but I also want to teach my audience something. I want to impart some wisdom on them. And I think that that's just such a great approach. So kudos to you for handling that super well throughout the years. By the way, you used
Thanks
to
so
do
much.
3 interviews a week, which
Yeah.
that is so much.
Yeah, when we switched to in person, it became pretty impossible with traveling out. But yeah, we used to do that, and I basically would just do it. It was a lot of work on the couple of days, but it was not like terrible. I don't have like bad like memories of it. Those days were long and grueling because I would do like, you know, 2 days of the month. I would do 5 to 7 back-to-back interviews, and I would
Yeah.
just knock them out in 2 days, and then I was done for the rest of the month. So those days were exhausting, but they were also fun. It was like I connected with 6 or 7 people, had conversations with all of them. But also, to be fair, at the time, I was doing 3 interviews a week and doing them like that, but they were like 35-minute interviews. So now my interviews are pretty much all of them are over an hour. The one we just released was 90 minutes. So I'm like, these kind of in-person longer form conversations are more what I'm interested in doing now. So it's now been more like quality and length of conversation with one person rather than like 30-minute quick hitters with 3 people, if that makes sense. So it's been a little bit different of a format, but I enjoy it.
Yeah, so obviously it's fun to have this conversation with you because I can ask you questions that I get asked all the time.
Yeah.
So the next thought process is here, and I know you've done it in a multitude of ways. But how do you get these individuals on your show? Because that's the second question I get. First is who's your favorite? Second question is how do you get all these big names on your show? Like, how do you go about that? Is it networking? Is it reaching out? Is it paying them? Like, what's all that stuff?
Yes. All of the above. Although like I run a site called Guestio and there's a lot of like pay to play opportunities on there. I could there's maybe like if you count Shaq in that, because it was more like I donated to a charity and then got a connection, but if I didn't donate, I wouldn't have gotten the opportunity to get the connection. So like there's a couple of things like that where it's been kind of nebulous working its way to people. But Mostly just networking relationships, the people that I know, asking for introductions, going to events. And then at this point, have a I have some good relationships with some solid publicists. And you know this as a podcaster, you get 250 pitches a
Ugh,
month on people who want to come on your show.
yeah.
But there are like 2 or 3 people that regularly send me solid people. And so I have decent guest flow from that. And then I do a lot of my own cold reach out still, mostly on Instagram. And then a lot of the other ones are, hey, would you mind making an intro to so and so if you thought, we had a great conversation? Just curious if you could make an intro to this person or that person or whatever. So it's a combination of really everything. Honestly, it's like you've got to put a bunch of lines in the water to get a bite.
Yeah. It's true. And same for me. And I've never paid. It's funny. I've never paid anybody, not fully against it if it's like an ideal person. But somebody asked me at Podfest, like, they go, you've never paid for, with an attitude, of course, you've never paid for any of these guests. I'm like, no. She's like, not even Gabby Bernstein. So Gabby's been on my show twice. And I was like, no, do you want me to text her right now and see if she wants to come on a third time? And she just shut up after that. Like, she was like
Yeah.
attacking me. I'm like, look, like, if it's amazing.
People attack you for any reason they could possibly attack you for, bro. Like
It's
if you
crazy.
did pay for them, she'd be like, you paid for those guests. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like
There was no winning. There was no winning.
right.
Absolutely not. But like, it's so fascinating to have this conversation with you because there's so many similarities, right? And like when you talk about the PRs, like, dude, 30 emails a day, like just PR companies just blowing me up. And I've probably only gotten 2 good people. Like Sean T has been on my show through a PR company, and Drama from
Okay.
Robin Big has been on my show through a PR company.
Okay.
But otherwise, I'm like, I don't know who these people are. The story's not that interesting.
Yeah.
And so that's something I'm taking away. I always try and take something away from every interview. Like, okay, let's create high level relationships with good PR people, and be able to take that to the next level. So I want to ask you a question that I ask every single person on the show. It's a 2-part question. The first part of the question is, what is your definition of success? And the second part is, what are 3 things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself?
My definition of success is to define your own success. It's a moving target and it's subjective based on every single person listening to this. So for me in particular, it's what I mentioned earlier. It's success equals freedom to me, like financial freedom, time freedom, location freedom, and relationship freedom, people freedom. I don't know exactly how to articulate that one, but basically like spending time with people I love.
Yeah.
And so if I can optimize my life in a way to check all of those boxes, then that's ideal for me. Now I'm starting to understand a little bit more about like how much more important impact or like legacy or whatever cheesy word you want to insert there uh, is to me. And I'm something I've been working through lately, where it's like my business does well enough to, I'm not making millions and millions a year, but I do well enough now from my business paying me where all like I don't have to spend a ton of time in my business, where it's like my freedom levels are all pretty high
Yeah.
in that sense. But I also find myself like itching to go do something big again. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like to go take
Yeah.
a big risk and to go like, you know, drive myself crazy for another couple of years attacking a new goal or something. So there's always like that tick in my brain that always makes me want to go attack something. So I would say impact is like kind of like becoming more of an important thing for me as of late. And then also health is becoming more of an important thing for me. So freedom, health, impact, people I love, like that's the success. That's what success means to me. And obviously money is a big part of pretty much all of those. So,
Yeah.
having more money is always better than having less money. But that's what success means to me. And what about, like I said at the very beginning of this, like the big thing is really just trying to figure out what it means for you, whoever you are listening to this, like what does success mean for you? And then relentlessly attack it, because I think of a terrible version of living life is working your whole life to find a version of success that is no longer the version of success that you want. And I think a lot of people are chasing a version of success that they don't want, and it's always eluding them. And they think that once they achieve it, they'll like just reach this magical moment of happiness. And so I, encourage people to go after your goals and get to where you want to be, because you might find that you actually want to be somewhere else. And if you don't do that, and act with urgency, then you might spend 30 years climbing a mountain you didn't want to get to the top of. And that's kind of a tragic story. So figure out what that means for you, and like, attack it, try to go get it, see what it feels like to get it, because you might really want something else.
Yeah. So you mentioned legacy and impact. So I want to ask you a question that I don't ask every time, but I ask when it makes sense. Um, so at the end of your life, imagine everything you've created, your podcast disappears, your businesses no longer exist. But if you could only be remembered for one sentence, what would you want that sentence to be?
I guess really it just would come down to being known for loving and caring about the people that I came across. I sign off my show uh, as often as I remember to. Honestly, like before, it was like a built-in like outro that went on every episode. Now I say it at the end of my interviews, just as if I remember to. But I would say leave every relationship better than you found it. Was like the sign off for my show, because it was about networking and relationships and friendships and all that. And that's kind of what I would want to be known for, is just, like, regardless of whatever else Travis did, everybody he came across, he tried to make their lives better. And that would be enough for me.
I love it, man. So I wrap up every single interview with the same question. But before we get there, where can people find you? Where can they connect with you? What's all the good stuff?
Yeah, travischappell.com is like the hub to find, if you want to find out more of our Guestio concierge services, or, podcast coaching or whatever else we offer. You go to travischappell.com, and then my socials are there as well. Probably most active on Instagram at Travis Chappell. However, if I have one request from anybody listening, we have been podcasting for almost 7 years, but YouTube we just started last year, which was an epic mistake on my part. And so now I'm playing catch up, and I ask anybody who's listening to this to go subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is at Travis Makes Friends on YouTube. So go subscribe over there. If you want to check out any of my episodes, I ask that you watch them on YouTube instead of listening to them on Spotify or Apple, just because, yeah, like I said, we're playing catch up. So that would be helpful.
Dude, crazy that you said that as well. I've always had a YouTube channel, but it was always just the audio feed with a still image
Yeah.
that would just get sent from Libsyn out to YouTube. Because
Yep.
I always said, who would sit there and watch two people sitting side by side having a conversation for 45 minutes, an hour, whatever. And then COVID hit and everybody was doing it. And I look back and I was like, dude, if I had 5 years of content, or however many years before that I started, like
Yeah.
on YouTube already, like it would have been a complete game changer. So it's so funny that you did the same thing. Like I feel like I really just started my YouTube a year and a half ago.
Yep.
And I
Same.
still don't push it enough. It's still just kind of there. So
Yeah.
I'm glad we're on the same page when it comes to that.
Yeah, it was an oversight, bro, but it will not happen again. You know what I mean? So I just like, it was one of those things where when I started, it was like, man, this is going to look so bad because I've been working on audio side for so long, but people can't see your numbers on audio. You know what I mean? So, but when you start a YouTube channel, everybody can see your numbers. So it's gonna look weird. And I had this kind of imposter syndrome thing going on, and I had this like ego shattering moment that was like, people are gonna look at my channel and see this video has 54 views and be like, oh, I thought your podcast was big, But it was just like, I got to get over that and just start publishing content there, just like I did on audio. And even if it takes another 5 or 6 years of posting to like get this channel up, I think it's going to be totally worth the investment of time and energy. So yeah, YouTube, go over there. Travis Makes Friends on YouTube and check us out. Watch an episode or two.
There you go. Like I said, I wrap up every single interview with the same question. Since the show is called the Growth Now Movement, that question is, in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
Biggest moment of growth. Probably when I started my podcast, for a lot of reasons, not just for my podcast, because it was also around the time where I was leaving the religion I grew up in. And like that one decision was the biggest change I ever made in my life, because it wasn't just leaving the religion, it was a complete upheaval of all of my values and things I held dear, and foundation of morality and all of those things. So that was the biggest change I've ever experienced, for sure, was right around that time. It wasn't because of the podcast per se. I'm just trying to like put it in perspective of the timeline. That it was right around that same time where I was kind of going through all of that. So that was easily the biggest change of my
I
life.
love it, man. So we'll have to have you on a second time. We'll talk about that side of your life, because that's like the whole first version of you.
As a
So we
precursor,
we could
yeah.
we could dive into that, dude. But thank you so much for coming on. This has been absolutely amazing. I appreciate you, man, and I look forward to staying connected.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it, Justin. Thanks so much, man.